Elon Musk said that it's easier to buy drugs than it's to buy GPUs, and today we have a man who's trying to solve this here.
That's it.
Welcome, Mark. Welcome to Crypto Town. Welcome to Dubai.
Thanks, man.
So, Mark, in your previous life, you've been a civil engineer who's working on like large-scale energy and like infrastructure projects. You were then a co-founder of like multiple projects. One of them was a company building wearables for medical sensors, right? After that, you also were an investment partner in a bunch of funds, and now you're the co-founder of Aether, which is building a decentralized GPU network, right? You guys were one of the first projects to conduct a successful note sale at a scale of that was never heard before. You raised like around $123 million, right? Before we dive into all of this, who is Mark and what's your story?
Yeah, man. Well, I think you covered a lot of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think I'm just someone who really likes making things, right? When I started my career in that kind of oil and gas infrastructure space, I was very lucky, right? Because I joined this organization. They were building really big, exciting things, but that itself wouldn't have kind of kept me interested for all that long. But what was really cool about this first job was that every maybe 9 months, every almost a year, every year, they would put you in a new position, right? So I originally went and I started and I was doing a lot of the civil engineering, kind of environmental science work. And then after a year there, they're like, okay, now you're going to do the marine version of that. So I was out kind of spending a lot of time on boats. Very quickly after that, they were, maybe have you thought about doing more on the kind of the engineering side? How about we take a look at this marine civil work? And it was just like that. I mean, I spent a year as a lawyer, right, on the contracts team.
Okay.
And I really enjoyed the diversity of role. But to be honest, eventually I really realized that I enjoy the creative freedom that comes with being with building your own thing, right? Sometimes there are just things that as a founder you want to focus on because that's where the value is, and you only really get that when you're building something that's yours. So I started my entrepreneurial journey, but I feel like my life is just a consistent feeling of FOMO, right?
Okay.
It's always like, what am I missing? I feel FOMO in Dubai right now because I'm based in Singapore. Yeah. And I get here and it happens to me every time. I just get a huge amount of FOMO because there's so much going on here. But obviously you can't be everywhere. You can't do everything.
But you can move to Dubai.
You can. And this is what happens every time. I'll go back to Singapore. Yeah. And I'm a big fan of Singapore. Very, very happy in Singapore. And it'll take me like two weeks minimum to like decompress and remember why Singapore is the right place. I will say I'm there because it's a great place. It's a great place for Aether. We have a bunch of engineers in China. We have a bunch of engineers in Malaysia. I mean, my co-founder and I, Dan, we founded the company when we were both living in China. So we've got a lot of our kind of infrastructure in the region. So it makes sense for us to be in Singapore. It's great for the time zone. It's very convenient to access those teams if we need. But yeah, it would not take very much for me to be convinced to come to Dubai.
All right, I'll say it like 3 more times and probably you get it. There's a pattern here that I am observing. So last time I had Haseeb on the pod, and he's been through like multiple career changes as well in his life, right? And he was like, it's just about like the art of learning, right? You keep on learning different things, and for you, I feel it's very similar, right? If I want to go chronologically in your life, you did bachelor's in environmental science and business management, 2 very different things, and you don't come across people who've done like these 2 combinations, right? How have your growing years been like, and what is up with you? Like, as you mentioned, right, like a life in oil and gas, and now after that, decentralized GPUs, right? So, what has this entire journey been like?
Yeah, it's funny. The 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 statement that you mentioned from Hasib is very, very true, right? It is absolutely the art of learning. And when I was getting parachuted into all of these different roles as a young kind of person in my career, the thing that I learned from that period of time was that you can adapt really quickly to something that you're unfamiliar with. You just have to be comfortable being unfamiliar with it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Everyone wants to feel like they're an expert. You know, you fall into your comfort zone very, very quickly as a human. And being able to operate outside your comfort zone, I think, is a superpower, right?
Yeah.
But it takes time to develop that confidence, right? That you're able to put yourself out of your comfort zone, particularly in ways that have a financial impact, like changing your career or becoming an entrepreneur, right? Those are big life decisions, and you do really need to take a little bit of a leap to to get there. But yeah, I like that statement of kind of learning how to learn.
Yeah.
It's critical.
Yeah. Where did you grow up? Where are you from originally?
Born in Sydney in Australia, but actually lived only for 6 years in Australia before moving overseas.
Mm-hmm.
Actually spent 8 years growing up in Bangkok, Thailand.
Yeah.
Did all of my kind of early schooling there. Fell in love with Thailand. I went back there with my wife, who's British Australian as well, to get married.
Yeah.
So Thailand's always been a massive and fantastic kind of part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
After Thailand, family moved to Singapore. Lived in Singapore for a couple of years as a kid as well, before moving to London. I didn't go at that point in time. I went to boarding school and university, so I was kind of coming back and visiting my parents in London. Before I went to university, I did a gap year.
Mm-hmm.
So I took a year off and went and worked my way around Europe, just in bars and hostels.
Yeah. Backpacking?
Yeah.
Were you trying to find yourself? That's what most of the people say.
I don't think funnily enough, I don't think I was necessarily trying to find myself. I really had no other objective than just exploring. But I definitely came back a slightly different person, that's for sure.
Nice.
It was a moment of growth for me. I was a little bit of maybe a naughty child,
mm-hmm.
right, growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And this year backpacking, being highly independent, making new friends in every kind of city or town that you went into, it was very important for my development, kind of looking back.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I didn't go out there to change or find myself, but I did in the end.
Nice. So tell me, so you were working in oil and gas industry, right? And at that time you were not an entrepreneur, right? So what changed? Like, when was that moment that you realized, okay, fuck all of this, and this is now when I want to build something of my own?
Yeah. I kind of gained a little bit of a disdain in some ways for the corporate existence, right?
Big words.
To be honest, I thought. I have a huge amount of respect for the company that I worked for. I think they were, honestly, a pretty incredible place for a young person to get a career, and one of the only companies that can build the type of things that they build. But even within an organization like that, there were just such severe limits or arbitrary limits that I didn't really agree with, around particularly sort of career progression and recognition for work done and things like that. And I remember looking at what a career path might be within this organization or an organization, similar. Let's say you want to get up to the top, right? Up there with the senior vice presidents and the directors of the company. I think I looked, and the earliest that anyone had ever reached that position was, I think, like 15 years, right? But that was an outlier by almost 10 years, right? The average was roughly 25 years to get to that position. And I remember sitting there and kind of saying, okay, if I set myself this target, right? Because I think, if you're in an organization and you're ambitious, like, why wouldn't you set your target at the top? That's a 25-year commitment, and with no guarantee that you'll get there. What can I do elsewhere with that 25 years? And I started to look, and at this point in time, I was getting really interested in the startup ecosystem. I didn't really maybe have necessarily all that much of an idea of what I wanted to do, but I loved the idea of a startup. And this kind of 25-year horizon that I was seeing within the current company that I was working looked to me like, if I took it into the startup world, that was five-year horizons, right? That was five-year opportunities to, maybe fail and restart, right? But I just felt like the odds were far more in my favor for reaching the sort of goal that I'd hoped to achieve if I could go and take that 25 years and break it down into in a way, smaller sprints.
Yeah, and how many years has it been now to this thought?
So since I left that company, it was 8.
8.
Yeah, 8 years. So I founded my first company. That was the biotech company. That was maybe 3 to 4 years, and then started Aether, and that's been
Sweet.
4 years now.
Where were you when you started your first company? Were you in Shanghai, Beijing?
No, so I started my first company. In many ways, I started it 6 months before I left my job. I was working. I kind of went through. I mean, the great thing about startups is, and even more now than there was, there's so much resource online helping you understand how to develop and formulate ideas, how to process things, how to kind of get from the first step to the next. I went through all of the kind of YC lectures, and I did all of that while I was working in my spare time. So that process of kind of the early iteration and the planning and the development just prior to kind of full execution, I was doing before I was kind of fully unemployed. And
call it self-employed.
Yeah, self-employed. And then once I felt ready, you don't really ever feel fully ready, but I was kind of pretty ready. I pulled the plug and left. And I will say, during this time as well, I was traveling a lot. Whenever I was not working, I was doing very remote stuff. So I would be on this kind of remote desert job site for like 8 weeks at a time, and then I'd have 2 weeks off. So it was 8 weeks on, 2 weeks off. And during the 2 weeks off, I would travel to kind of different places. I'd spend a lot of time, going to the Bay Area. So I was like, okay, is this the location that I want to kind of be to base my startup? I'd go to New York. Is this the area? I was pretty confident at the time that Australia wasn't where I wanted to launch the startup. And then I remember one evening I saw this documentary, and it was called Shenzhen, the Silicon Valley of hardware, right? And it kind of opened my eyes to the idea that maybe China was a place that I'd want to be if there was a hardware element to my company, which it was. So started to think a little bit more about China. Still kind of pie in the sky, didn't really know what to do, didn't have very many friends in China at all, but just coincidentally went for a kind of more of a recreational trip to Taipei, to Taiwan, and met a guy who became one of my best mates, who's like, you should come check out Beijing. And I told him about my idea, my startup that I was looking to found, and he pretty much red pilled me to move to China and take that leap. So I did.
That's beautiful, man. And you mentioned like the other day when we were playing paddle that you met Dan in Beijing, right? And that your co-founder Dan, and that's how like the Aether started. And I'm not sure if a lot of people know, but Aether wasn't like a crypto first company, right? You guys have been working in the GPU space for a while, in the gaming cloud with gaming cloud companies, right, for a while. What is the Aether story? Break it down for us. How did it start? How did you meet Dan? What's the Aether lore?
Yeah, so Dan is, I guess, taking a step back. Both Dan and I are big gamers, right? Me.
Top 3 games, quickly.
Top 3 games, Counter-Strike, so CS, big World of Warcraft fan, and then all time on the list would also be Warcraft 3 Frozen Throne.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, continue.
Dating myself. Yeah, aging myself. Sure. But good games.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'd always been an avid gamer. Dan as well, but Dan actually was in the gaming space. He was very early on at Riot Games. Kind of progressed rapidly through the company. That company was just growing so quickly, as I'm sure you know. League of Legends was developed by Riot. Dan led global publishing for them, and then they went through this process of acquisition by Tencent. And during that process, they said, "Hey Dan, we want you to move to Shanghai and kind of lead this acquisition as kind of COO." So he was in China, in Shanghai, and I was in Beijing, and we had some mutual friends, and just very socially just started to become mates, and yeah, I don't really know where the very original sort of idea happened, but we met a couple of kind of very close friends of ours who were working on infrastructure within the Tencent cloud gaming space. And Dan and I were both kind of more crypto, I guess, adjacent than the kind of our engineering buddies. But we started to kind of chat about what cloud gaming was kind of unlocking for people in China. Not many people know this, but Google Stadia was like the cloud gaming tech for Google. That tech is mostly about making good games available on crappy computers, right? That's like Google Stadia. It doesn't really deal with like maybe mobile as much. But Tencent Cloud and kind of the providers in China were much more interested in how do they unlock great mobile games for gamers across their region, primarily because if they can give that service to their customers are going to need to buy a lot more data. Right? And the more data they use, that's where the money comes from for these telcos. So this was like a really cool business model that was being pioneered in China. Anyway, we looked at that and we thought, hey, mobile cloud gaming would do really well in Southeast Asia, in developing markets. The vast majority of gamers out there are mobile gamers.
Which year was this?
Pardon?
Which year was this?
This was maybe like pre-COVID, or around that time.
Okay. That's when mobile gaming was on the come up as well.
Yeah. So we were very much kind of like just discussing things in that realm, but the Tencent gaming, the kind of the cloud gaming infrastructure that's in China, very much has some advantages, with government support and kind of sovereign infrastructure that is not necessarily repeatable if you're kind of expanding into Malaysia, for example. So we took a look at kind of how maybe we could still deliver a similar service, but start to think about infrastructure in a more efficient manner. And that was when the original idea for potentially using a decentralized infrastructure stack kind of came to the fore. So yeah, in the beginning, we were very much solving this problem that was kind of quite close to Dan and my heart, this idea of unlocking the content that we loved for gamers on any device, right? And I don't think we in the beginning, I don't really think we had any idea how we would, solve it at scale. But we kind of just, I don't know, we just managed to kind of figure it out along the way, which I think is how a lot of startups kind of end up at their final destination.
Yeah, and so I have an interesting question here. You mentioned that your earliest vision, like the first vision, was to provide mobile gaming at scale, right? At the same time, Aethir's thesis has always been that for example, you guys only provide enterprise grade level GPUs, right? There's no consumer equipment, right? So how did that shift come into picture?
No, so actually the reason, and this is actually a very, very kind of cool thing, but the reason that Aether is exclusively enterprise grade, right, is because you can't deliver a cloud gaming service without enterprise grade infrastructure there at the core, right? Because if you think about it, you've got you need high performance GPUs, you need them to be connected to high performance bandwidth and network infrastructure. And you need to make sure that the service that is being provided to the gamer is not going to shut down, right? Like if you're running something on someone's gaming PC, for example, maybe they just turn their PC off and then the cloud gamer on the other end is going to be sad, right? So you need to build your service on the back of enterprise equipment, or the big gaming companies will never work with you, right? They would never trust a network built on the back of retail hardware. So unlike a storage network or a static rendering network or anything like that, for real-time rendering, for cloud gaming in particular, you 100% need enterprise grade infrastructure, or you just can't do it, right? So we were forced to build a different type of DPIN to the other DPINs that we were seeing, right? DPINs, they weren't called DPINs at the time, but the DPINs that everyone was familiar with or becoming familiar with were largely aggregations of consumer tech. But we knew that if we wanted to build something that gaming companies would buy, it needed to be enterprise grade. It needed to meet their SLAs. And that decision was probably the most impactful decision that we made as a company, right? Because that meant that we started to build infrastructure in a way that big companies, enterprises, were capable of using. And when we started to grow our AI services stack, we were capable of actually growing it, right? We had the infrastructure already there. We had the relationships, we had the understanding, we knew what needed to be done. We weren't starting from zero, right? If we'd aggregated a bunch of gaming PCs, for example, and then we said, hey, okay, now we're going to start offering enterprise grade services to AI companies, we would have been starting from zero, years behind where we needed to be. Would have missed the boat for sure.
Yeah. And how was the decision made that, this is the time when now we need a token behind this, a token economy to sustain this, to reward different people in this ecosystem, etc. And like, when did you decide that you need crypto for this?
So I don't think we necessarily decided we needed. Well, let me put it this way: you can't build what we're building without the blockchain, right? Or at least if you tried to do it, it would be more difficult than it needed to be. I don't think we came into this with or through the lens of wanting to be a crypto project per se, right? We're very happy that we're a crypto project. We're immensely bullish on decentralized infrastructure, but I don't think we necessarily, when we're building out this network, we're thinking, okay, how can we build a crypto project? We were just thinking, how can we build a network that's scalable into the regions where we can best sell access to these gamers, right? And that meant a distributed ecosystem. And if you think about what it takes to build these types of networks, right, you need trust more than anything, because the network is built on hardware that we don't own, right? So we need to be able to trust that if you're providing us hardware, we need to be able to trust that you're going to do the job and the work that we're asking you to do. We need to be able to trust that you're not going to exit the ecosystem during a critical task and then make us look bad to our customers. And you need to be able to trust that you're going to get paid, right? Now, you can achieve similar things without the blockchain, but they're a whole lot slower, right? Within the crypto world, we know that you can come onto our network, you can connect your GPU to our ecosystem, you can stake a couple of tokens, right? And then our network, because of that staking value and because you've connected your GPU, network trusts you, right? Because you've effectively bought trust with that stake. There's no paper contract. There's no onboarding of entities and things like that. It's a much more scalable process. And then on top of that, we have all of the smart contracts built into the ecosystem. So when you do work, right, that work is captured on the blockchain. It's recognized by our ecosystem, and there's not some Aether accountant sitting there going, okay, yeah, you did the work, I'm gonna now send you the money, send me your bank account please. Oh, sorry, you're in Turkey, we don't have a banking entity in Turkey, we can't send you your money for the work that you did. No, it's all smart contracts. It's automated. You know that if you enter the ecosystem, you've staked, you're ready for work. If the network sends you a job and you do it, it's automatic that you get paid straight into your wallet. That trustless environment, that ability for you to enter the ecosystem and not have to trust, some dude, and you'll just be able to know categorically that if you do something, you're going to get paid, is a massive kind of scalability advantage. And also, it's borderless, right? It's not about what countries Aether has a presence, right? It's what countries do people have GPUs. And wherever those GPUs are, you can instantaneously connect them to our network. You don't need to worry about all of the legal and banking structures that would be necessary if you were trying to do this in a truly centralized way.
Right. Until now, right now, like statistically, what have you seen according to different geographies? Where do you find most of the GPUs being connected to your ecosystem? Where do you find most of the user base for these GPUs coming in from? And can you share some numbers and stats around also like the supply of GPUs that you have? What kind of GPUs do you have, etc.?
Sure. So, funnily enough, we have more supply wanting to onboard into our network than we can accept at the moment, right? GPU providers all over the world are very, very keen on getting their infrastructure into Aether. It's one of the best places to ensure you have a high utilization of your equipment. It's one of the best places from a rewards perspective. It's just a really good way to de-risk ownership of very expensive hardware, right? If you, the reason why we have supply on the sidelines, right, is not because we necessarily want that. We'd love to kind of just scale the network as much as we could. But we do need to kind of look at this through the lens of what does a successful deep-in network look like, right? And I think the best metric for that is utilization, right? So that means you can't let supply outpace demand, right? If you, for example, just let any GPU join the network, with no restrictions, what's going to happen is you're going to get an insane number of GPUs within your infrastructure, and they're going to be effectively draining tokens from your network, right? Because we have what we call a proof of capacity reward. It's essentially a reward that is available for idle compute, right? So even if you're not doing work, right? Even if you're not out there, helping someone train a model, right? You're still getting rewards for just sitting idle, and that's insane. Like you
I love that, bro.
Can't get that at all in Web 2. That's like paying someone for nothing, right? But these are the kind of the secret source elements that kind of a token gives a network, that bootstrap ability early on. Anyway, we have this proof of capacity reward, and we want to make sure that that reward is not just being drained by a whole bunch of GPUs that are sitting idle with a lower probability of actually being used. So we try to keep demand in touch with supply. We want to be supply led in the sense that we don't want we want to minimize situations where a customer comes to us and says, hey, we want 1,000 H100s, and we say, hey, sorry, we don't have 1,000 H100s. We don't want that situation to occur, but at the same time, we don't want to have 10,000 more H100s than we need sitting idle for extended periods of time. So we have this kind of growth growth on the supply side that's kind of in touch with growth on the demand side. Now, that being said, there's a whole bunch of GPUs from people all over the world that would love to join the network. Right now, because utilization is crucial, and customers do have a preference on where their GPUs are. So, for example, if you're dealing with an Indian team, most often they would probably prefer GPUs in Indian data centers, right? Local, accessible, low latency. Same goes for US teams, European teams, Japanese teams, Korean teams, wherever. So if you look at the network map of all of the infrastructure that we have, it aligns with probably exactly what you would imagine demand for GPUs would look like based on where big AI projects are, right? So where do you think
SF?
Yeah, where exactly? So all the majority of the big AI companies, the pointiest end of the AI market is the US. So significant portion of our GPUs are there.
Okay. And because you're based in Asia, and you said there's a lot of like crucial infrastructure there as well, do you see a lot of demand on that side?
Yeah, it's growing. We're in 30 different countries, 93 different locations, again, all over the world. 400,000 or 500,000 kind of GPU containers, a massive distribution of all enterprise grade GPUs. We've got a whole bunch of co-located high performance compute infrastructure, right? Like H100s, H200s, literally thousands of those. Those big clusters are, on the east and west coast of the States. We've got really big clusters in India. We've got big clusters in Japan and Korea. We've got some really cool clusters coming online in Malaysia. So it's an interesting misnomer a lot of people think that a decentralized GPU network means every GPU is just kind of spread out, right? And then if you know a little bit about AI, the next question that you might ask is like, okay, well, what about co-located clusters, right? Because big AI workloads, they need their GPUs next to each other.
Right.
It's called co-location. If you have a distributed or decentralized network, does that mean you can't have co-located machines? Not the case. We have, to be honest, when you think about who owns an enterprise-grade GPU, the person who owns an enterprise-grade GPU probably doesn't own one. They probably are a business that owns a significant number, because they most likely purchased that for some business agenda, right? Whether it was training their own models or so that they could serve customers in the AI space. So actually, the majority of entities that contribute GPUs to our network are contributing them in co-located formats.
Got it.
So, yeah, GPUs everywhere.
Love that. A very crucial part of maintaining a decentralized network is the verifiability part of things, right? Whether when I'm saying that I'm connecting an H100, how can you be sure that I have an H100 and it's doing the work, right? And for that exact purpose, you've introduced a checker node, right? Can you explain what a checker node is, and then we'll slowly understand the huge node sale that you guys were able to pull off?
Yeah, for sure. You've done your research.
Yes, sir.
So the Aether ecosystem has three main roles. The first is what we call the container or the cloud host. That's the GPUs.
Okay.
Right? They're the engine of the network. They're the engine of the AI industry. And we call them containers, cloud hosts, or just obviously GPUs. That's the first role. The second role is the checker. I'll talk about that in a second. And the third role is the indexer. The indexer is effectively the matchmaker. It's kind of looking across all of the data sets generated by the checker, and it's saying, okay, a user is coming in, that user is in India, that user needs GPUs capable of doing this task, and it'll make the match between the customer and the right GPU cluster or container. The checkers are a really critical piece of that infrastructure stack, and they are effectively the police force, right? Now, like we mentioned and like you alluded to, when you join a network or when you're building a decentralized network, one of the most important things you need to overcome is kind of trust, right? The incentives that exist within networks like Aethir's are incredibly powerful for builders, right? They're designed to give you an incentive for joining our network, for doing the right thing. But as we all know, there are bad actors everywhere.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that networks like Aethir's have struggled in the past is through people coming and effectively spoofing the type of hardware that they're providing, right? They will have a really cheap GPU, right? Or a really cheap computer, and they'll, get a little bit tricky, and they'll attempt to convince the network that actually it's an H100, right? Now, as you can imagine, if you've got rewards set up in your network, your rewards are most likely going to be designed to pay more to someone who's contributing expensive equipment than someone who's contributing cheaper equipment, right? Makes sense. So if you go in and you've got a really cheap bit of hardware and you're telling me that you're a Ferrari, right? You're going to be paid more. And this is the way that bad actors attempt to effectively steal money from networks. Now, this has happened to a bunch of kind of our contemporaries in the space, and it was something that we were really worried about when we were building our network. So we decided to kind of stand up a role within our ecosystem, an autonomous role that had the sole purpose the specific purpose of addressing that challenge, right? And that's what the checker does. So the checker is effectively a police force that's out there constantly heartbeat sensing the network. You said you're an H100 yesterday. Are you still an H100 today, right? You say you did this work. Did you actually do this work? You say you've staked this amount of token. Did you actually stake this amount of token, right? It's constantly out there checking effectively the ecosystem to make sure that what you said happened, what you say you are is what you are. And that's how we can make sure that rewards are going to the right people. And we're not being drained by bad actors.
Got it. Now that we've understood what a checker node is, right, let's talk about the monumental node sale of $123 million, right? Before conducting this node sale, you had raised a Series A of $9 million from Animoca, Sanctor, Hashkey, right? All notable funds. First of all, my first question is that why did you go ahead with the node sale route? You could have just released nodes and people could have started earning rewards on that. Why did you decide that, okay, this is something that we want to do, we want to raise money from the community?
Yeah. To be honest, the checker role in the beginning was not a role that we ever thought we would offer to the community, right? It was a role that we did. If you think about projects in the crypto space, usually there's this kind of path to decentralization that they follow, right? Really, really hard to be fully decentralized day one. So you kind of have this gradient.
Progressive decentralization.
And for us, obviously decentralizing the GPUs was the first step. And then originally we planned, okay, after that, decentralize the checkers. So that would happen, maybe that would have happened now in our life cycle, 6 months or so after TGE. But I remember we were sitting, working on our tokenomics and working on our distribution mechanisms and kind of doing the things that we were doing, preparing for kind of launch, because this was still months before our TGE, and we saw what Zai did right with their node sale, and we thought, wow, these guys have done something pretty cool here, right? They've taken a role within their ecosystem, and they've offered that role to their community, and their community effectively has the ability to now earn rewards as a result of doing work within that network. And this was a really interesting thing for us for a couple of reasons. First, our network is all enterprise grade, right? That means we're very, very picky on what hardware we allow into our ecosystem. That's a really good thing for our customers. It's a really good thing for revenue. But it means that, the person that has the gaming PC, the person that has the MacBook, right, they can't contribute as a GPU provider, right? They're kind of excluded in many ways. So we thought, wouldn't it be really cool then if the checker was something that those sorts of users could do, right? Because the hardware requirements to operate a checker were low, right? You didn't need a fancy computer. So we thought, this is a great opportunity to open up roles that provide rewards to the members of our community that don't have enterprise grade equipment, which is obviously almost everyone. So we thought, that's really cool. Secondly, we thought, yes, we intended to decentralize the checker eventually, but wouldn't it be a great signal to show that the police force of our network were our community and not just ourselves, right? The idea of a network that polices itself is obviously common, but maybe not ideal, right? The idea that there's this kind of separation of police and state, was kind of pretty attractive, I thought, and something that we liked. So we decided to kind of pursue the checker the checker sale, the way that you kind of look at it, or the way that I think best represents what the checker node sale is kind of the yellow taxi business model, and I think most familiar to people in New York, right? So to drive a yellow taxi in New York, you first have to buy what's called a taxi medallion, right? That taxi medallion is effectively your license to drive a yellow taxi. Now, what does the yellow taxi represent, right? The yellow taxi is a badge of trust, right? It's trust that anyone on the sidewalk can, throw the hand up or whistle, and a trusted member of that infrastructure, right? Trusted member of that ecosystem, one of these yellow taxis will pick them up and take them to their destination, right? That trust is what the taxi driver is buying with that medallion, permission to be trusted, right? And they pay for that. But if you pay for one of those medallions and you're trusted and you're accepted by the ecosystem, and everyone's like, yes, you have permission to drive. If you don't drive your taxi, if you just leave it in your driveway, you're not going to earn any money, right? You need to actually go and do the work to get the reward, right? And that's the structure of the node sale, right? The first thing we're doing is we're selling the ability for you to buy trust, right? You buy the license. The purchase of that license is an indication of your commitment to doing the work in the ecosystem, right? We didn't want to be giving these licenses out to people that were just going to, forget about it or maybe do it for a couple of days and then not do it, right? We wanted commitment. We wanted their ecosystem to be, we wanted the right sort of people to be involved. So similar to how the taxi medallions work with yellow cabs, we did a similar thing. So
Right.
people buy the checker node license, right? And that checker node license gives them that permission to operate in our ecosystem. And if they do the work in the ecosystem, they get rewards. And I think people really appreciated that, right? They loved the decentralization of it, the ability to, participate in an ecosystem in a way that gives you rewards and is long-term and it's stable and it's interesting and it makes sense, right? And that was, it exceeded all of our expectations, a huge amount.
Yeah.
It was a pretty special moment for us.
Yeah, that was a beautiful analogy. So we've understood the why of the checker sale, right? Now, so this particular section, I really want to focus for operators in the space like us who just want to learn the behind the scenes of a node sale, but mostly founders who might be looking forward to it, right? And to just put into perspective, like how big of a feat this was, is that very, very few projects even have come close who've tried attempting a node sale, right? Probably Sophon and Zero G come to my mind when I think of a successful node sale. And at that time, you sort of like pioneered node sales, right? It wasn't heard of, right? And people were like, how do you do a node sale? And then I've heard like so many founders or like operators tell me that, oh yeah, I've chatted with Karthik or I've chatted with someone from Aethir team to just like get an understanding of it, right? Because there's always like certain nuances. When you're doing a TG, there's a certain way how you do it. When you're doing a node sale, there's a certain way how you do it, right? Can you share your wisdom of your experience? How did you sort of like plan this and do a step-by-step process of this?
Yeah, definitely. I guess first of all, I think that the meta has definitely shifted, right? It's evolved. How people would do a node sale or an equivalent sort of sale today would be slightly different to the way we did it. So I think some of this wisdom might be outdated, but I think the fundamentals behind it are still true, right? And I think that's one of the reasons why it was so successful, some of these fundamentals. So hopefully those fundamentals come through, but definitely don't take this as like a step-by-step playbook of how to do it today. So I guess first of all, for those of you that aren't familiar with how the node sale operated, what we did was we had roughly, call it 60,000 nodes, right? That was the number of nodes that we thought we would make available, right? And this was the maximum number of nodes that there would ever be. we also knew that maybe we wouldn't sell every node, right? So we had to have an idea of what the minimum number of nodes we needed for the network to operate effectively was. And then we had to make sure that at least that amount was sold. So whatever the number of nodes are that you need within your ecosystem, make sure that that you can still make a guarantee that that number is sold, right? If we needed to sell 50,000 nodes, right, and then we'd need to raise $300 million to sell 50,000 nodes, then that would be a silly idea, right? So make sure that you, within whatever the pricing structure you have set up, make sure that you can actually sell the number of nodes you need for the node sale to have a functional effect within your ecosystem. The way that we structured the node sale was in what we called tiers, right? So our nodes were effectively priced on an exponential curve, with each tier of nodes having a certain number of nodes in that tier. So think 50,000 nodes split into 50 tiers, each tier having 1,000 nodes. And within Aethir's node sale, every node was the same, right? There were not different types of nodes, right? If you bought tier 1 and someone else bought tier 10, those nodes were the exact same. And the way we structured it was effectively a first come, first serve, right? Which we thought was the most fair. And as the 1,000 nodes in tier 1 sold out, okay, 1,000 nodes in tier 2 would sell out, and it would sell out up this curve. And as the tiers would sell out, the tiers would get slightly more expensive, right? So if you bought tier 10, that's obviously more expensive than tier 1. Now, a couple of things that I think were important in what we did. So first of all, we had a whitelist, right? The whitelist opened up, can't remember exactly, but it was like a week earlier than the public sale, right? And every sale that was made in our node sale was public. Not like doxed public, but like the wallet address was public. Okay, one node in tier 3 was bought, it was public, like you could see it. And the same went for the whitelist. And the whitelist was, trying to say this in like a clear way, the whitelist was effectively a maximum of 50% of every tier, right? I think what would have really pissed me off if I was buying nodes, right? If I was retail, what would have really pissed me off is if I went and I looked at the whitelist, I looked at the pre-sale, and the pre-sale had sold 100% of the first 5 tiers. That would have pissed me off. I'd be like, insiders fucking got all the good deals again, right? That's annoying, typical, right? That would have frustrated me. So we didn't want that to happen. So what we did was whitelist can only get a maximum of 50% of a tier, right? So that anything someone gets in whitelist is also available for someone in the public sale.
Sweet.
Right? So we started there, and we really engineered that idea from a place of kind of fairness, right? But it had an unintended side effect that I think is really powerful. Everything that we did, to be fair, came from this idea of fairness, right? The fact that all the sales were public. We also wanted people to see what was happening, right? It wasn't like backroom deals. Like this was like all going through the same platform, everyone buying the same thing. There's no special prices, right? You can see tier 10 cost this much for this wallet, it costs that much for that wallet, right? Same. But that like public sale infrastructure and the fact that 50% was the max that whitelist had access to, what it ended up doing is it created a roadmap effectively of how much the whitelist buyers were willing to buy. And the way that the crypto Twitter, crypto retail mind works is generally in a way that we usually assume that people that have got in early, right, on whitelists and pre-sales and things, we usually think of them almost as kind of smart money, right? Maybe that's the connected people, that's the whales, that's the VCs, that's the people that are on the inside. So if those guys bought up to tier 30, right, and it's all public and it's 50%, so everything that the insiders got, anyone else can get, that the tiers that they bought ended up then being effectively a roadmap for what retail needed to buy after, right? So retail were just watching this kind of whitelist sell, and they were saying, well, if smart money's buying to here, right, I'm going to at least buy to there as well, right? And then they went beyond. So we had, I think it was like 40% of ended up being about 40% of the sale went to whitelist participants, and 60% went to retail. So retail bought beyond whitelist, which I think makes sense, right? They have maybe a slightly higher risk tolerance than maybe the what you might call or consider smart money. But yeah, it was pretty crazy. And then the other thing that we did again was, if for example you had kind of a waterfall type sales structure, right, where everyone's competing for tier 1, and then tier 1 sells out, and then then you can buy tier 2, and tier 2 sells out, and then you can buy tier 3. I feel like that's a really suboptimal sale process, right? Because think about how many people are going to get pissed off from tier 1. They're going to be like, tier 1, and they're not going to get in, right? And then they're going to go, and then they're going to go, okay, I'm going to buy tier 2, but everyone's competing for tier 2 at the same time. So it's like, you imagine the frustration of like, where would that frustration end? You know, like, would it end at like, would this guy finally get his node at like tier 15? Like, think about how pissed off they'd be by the time they finally got the node that they wanted, right? So we were like, we don't want that, right? We want every node to be available for sale at the same time, right? So if you want, you can immediately start buying tier 2, right? Like, don't compete for tier 1, compete for tier 2. To be honest, when we opened the public sale, we had massive spikes around tier 12 and tier 10. People just game theorying. They're like, where's the place that we guarantee we can buy, right? Because they knew that like all of the competition would be in these like very, very early tiers, and the high likelihood was that maybe they wouldn't get their node at that price. So that's kind of how we structured it. And then the other kind of piece of wisdom maybe here was the way that our pricing curve worked. It was just kind of a simple curve, but what the curve represented effectively was a lack of a ceiling on the amount that would be able to be contributed to the sale, right? So for example, if you had 100 nodes and each node was worth $100 and that was your sale, then maximum you're going to be able to earn, right, is $10,000, right? That's like your ceiling. You know, categorically, no matter how well you do, your maximum is going to be 10,000. Yeah. Right? And in some cases, that's a good idea. But in other cases, you want to give yourself the ability to do better, right? So that's what this kind of pricing curve did. It gave us the ability to say, okay, right, we have 50,000 nodes. We don't need 50,000 nodes, right? But if we had 50,000 nodes, the way that the pricing curve works is effectively we didn't expect the final 20% or 10% of nodes to actually sell because they were very expensive on this curve, right? But it meant that if there was a member of our community that was just really bullish, right? And they're like, Aether is a $20 billion project, which we are, but we're not yet. But if Aether's, I'm bullish, I believe Aether's a $20 billion project, I can buy a node that's effectively priced in that sort of range. So it meant that the sale didn't have a ceiling, or it had a ceiling that was extremely high, right? And that was another reason why we were able to raise as much as we were, because we gave ourselves a flexibility in the amount that we're able to raise, such that we weren't limited by our own expectations of the sale. Right? If you'd said to Dan and I, like, how much do you think you're going to raise from this? It would have been nowhere near, like, we didn't even expect to raise as much as Zai.
What was the initial target when you were starting this?
I mean, I think Zai did something like 30 mil, right? And the idea that we could get 30 mil was like crazy. You know what I mean? It was totally crazy. But like, these guys crushed it. The market maybe is not interested anymore because they just went so hard in that sale. But yeah, and I felt also it would be kind of a lot of ego to think that we could come in and achieve something, as successfully as they have just achieved. So no, I mean, we were hopeful for, anything approaching that number, and then things went a bit wild.
This is beautiful, man. This was super insightful. I'm sure like people would learn so much from this. Just nearing towards the end of the podcast, right? So is it true that the ticker is ATH because you always want to hit all-time highs?
Yeah, we were very happy when we realized that we could have that as a ticker.
Yeah,
I couldn't believe that it hadn't been taken already.
Yeah. So, what does Aether mean?
Yeah, it's a cool question. So Aether actually has the same etymology as the word Ethereum, right? The same origin word. Back in ancient Greek times, they had astronomers, right, that would look to the sky. They had rudimentary telescopes and things, and they would look to the stars, and they didn't have an understanding of the void of space, right? They didn't recognize it as a void. They assumed that the universe had to be made of this substance, right? Something had to hold the stars in the sky, right? Otherwise they'd fall down. And the substance that they believed held the universe together, effectively the connective tissue of the universe, was called Aether.
Interesting.
So when we looked at building our network, the idea of decentralized nodes, of connectivity, of kind of creating this map, these clusters of GPUs, the idea of being the connective tissue of that ecosystem was really powerful for us, and that's where we came up with the name Aether.
Sweet. You also have a $100 million fund, right, for AI projects, and now you're slowly expanding to RWA as well. The first cohort of that fund, so we were a part of that, right, the first 5 projects. Moving forward, I think you've just announced like the 6th cohort, if I'm not wrong, right? So like, what is the goal with this fund now? Why RWA suddenly? And like, break it down for us.
For sure. So the goal of the fund is very much to support projects that require GPUs to scale, right? That's the goal. Work with companies, AI agent companies, AI infrastructure projects, even gaming companies as well that have a strong dependence on GPUs, and effectively giving them the bootstrapping capital, right, to hopefully help them scale, and as they scale, they require GPUs, right? You can't scale an AI company without GPUs, and we're building the connections and the friendships and the partnerships that we hope will lead to those companies scaling on our infrastructure. So it's planting the seeds to kind of have long-term revenue ROI as a result of these collaborations. So that was the initial focus of the fund. I think there was a sub or kind of a parallel focus around being really rapid with deployment. The space, we realized, moves so quickly in kind of AI. Narrative shifts so quickly, and that kind of sucks, right? Because most funds, you've got a DD and IC process. It's a minimum of 1 month, if not kind of 6 to 8 weeks. And in crypto world, often the narrative shifted by then, right? The ability for these teams to kind of gain momentum and shine in their moment is often missed. And that's really what a lot of these teams need, right? They need that badge of credibility. They need a little bit of capital to get things going. And if you can give them that boost when, the sun is out, when like the wind is in their sails, that can be often enough to kind of get them really going. And that's kind of what we wanted with this ecosystem fund. Not a traditional fund, not a slow moving kind of, fast DD process. No, this was like deployment within 1 to 2 days, right? This was kind of batch style releases, right? So that people could see the companies we were partnering with. So we gave them that credibility alongside the capital, and just momentum build for them, right, as well. So that was kind of the original goals. And recently we opened it up to RWA projects. Now, if you read my initial kind of announcement, the fund still has the exact same purpose, right? To scale businesses that will use GPUs within our ecosystem. So how does that relate to RWAs? Well, actually, GPUs themselves, right, are a scarce asset class, right? They're heavily in demand. They are revenue generating, right? Yield generating. They are effectively kind of like a form of property, right? You have RWAs for property, right? You have RWAs for bonds, right? There is an emerging meta around structured financial products, bundling structured financial products and GPUs. And I think that is really, really interesting, right? The idea that, maybe on the RWA side, you could fractionalize ownership of a cluster, right? Giving, regular person, not just like a massive fund, the ability to own and earn rewards from one of these clusters, I think is very, very cool, right? Think of, for example, the supply that you could onboard into a network like Aether if you could open up ownership of these GPUs to non-traditional owners, right? I think that would be really cool. What about structured financial products, right? The idea of not just yield-based products in crypto being funky tokenomics things. What if you had yield-based products built on the back of the revenue being generated by GPUs, right? Again, a potentially really interesting financial product that now becomes relevant to institutions, right? Because you're building it on the back of actual revenue as opposed to, crypto stuff, right? So all of these mechanisms that I think are going to come to the fore over the next kind of 6 months, this like DeFi layer for GPUs is something that we're very, very interested in. And we're aware that it's an emergent space. So this announcement of opening up the RWA fund was kind of a like a bat signal, that we're putting out there. We're really kind of hoping to put ideas in people's minds, right? If you're building in the RWA space, if you're looking for a really cool product, right, that you could sell to your institutional partners, why not GPUs? We've got them. We're a big name. We can help you grow. We'll work alongside you. This is, I think, this is a really cool opportunity for teams in the RWA space, teams in the DeFi space, teams in the structured financing space.
Yeah, 100%. I think the timing was pretty interesting because given like in the last 2 weeks, whatever happened with the mantra thing, right? And I was like, oh, the RWA fund is here.
That's it. That was an unfortunate coincidence from a timing perspective, but I think RWAs are going to be a massive piece of the narrative this cycle, and a persistent piece of narrative in the crypto space.
Yep, 100%. And we had JP yesterday on the pod as well, and like he broke down whatever happened. So I'll be releasing that soon as well. But yeah.
Oh, cool. That's the inside scoop.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you for doing this. This was like a masterclass in like a lot of sense for like a lot of operators and founders. That's usually like the kind of audience we try to like cater to. And I'm sure like people, there are so many projects who still think about node sales, but there are no like clear guidelines. Like I feel like even when it comes to TGs, there are so many launch pads now, so many people who have that knowledge, right? But node sales is still very limited. So that piece of wisdom was beautiful. I'm looking forward to like whatever we build together with Capex and Aether as well. And I'm sure like it's going to be beautiful. Thanks for doing this, man.
Thanks, man. Really appreciate it.